So, good morning. I'm very glad to be here to present our research, and I would like to thank the Black Hat organization team for giving us the opportunity to present this work. And I'm convinced that Black Hat is the right place for the larger dissemination of knowledge. So, I'm going to address the issue, is it possible to trust foreign encryption algorithm? And how is it possible to input mathematical backdoor at the design level, and if it is the case, how to do that? So I propose the following agenda. Of course, I will try to formalize and to explain the context behind this research. And I would like, before presenting the algorithm we have designed, to explain the recent history, I would say since the World War II, and more recent history about backdoor algorithms. Some are recent, famous, a few others are less known. Then I will present our algorithm, which is clearly and directly inspired by the advanced encryption standard and very close when considering the different parameters. And we explain how to break this cipher when you have the knowledge of the secret backdoor, and in a very efficient time. So let us first try to explain the context. In fact, it was, is it possible to disseminate cryptography through the world without condition if you have very secure systems? Of course, as far as export controls, export is concerned, it is not possible because you have a lot of international and national regulation that makes it impossible. But here we speak about export. And we can eventually understand that exporting strong cryptography to North Korea, to China, and so on, may be questionable. But in fact, this old debate since World War II, which came historically from the Enigma case, in fact tends to shift to the domestic aspect. And very recently, UK, it was in March this year, France, with the help of Germany, regularly tried to enforce control, but for domestic case. It means for domestic population. Of course, the alibi is always fighting against terrorism. I don't think it's the good explanation, because in fact, bad guys will always find a way to bypass any form of control you can enforce. But the vast majority of population will be under surveillance, or at least it is a risk. So even EU has a plan to put backdoors, and the news is from yesterday, December 5th, the German officials want to put backdoors in IoT in order to control every device enforcing encryption. So the question is it possible from a technical point of view, and how to do that? In fact, the control over cryptography started at the end of World War II, and I've here listed the main regulation. There is a very interesting point, because until 1997, cryptography was considered as a weapon. So there was strict regulation in the ITA, International Traffic and Arms Regulation. But in this year, in fact, it has been withdrawn from ITA. It doesn't mean that no longer controls were enforced, but in fact the world has changed. And instead of considering cryptography as an armored door, in fact, you have to understand that you have to take also the wall into account. It means management, computers, network, operating system. There are different kind of control that can be enforced. It is the syndrome I teach to my students, the armored wall and the wallpaper. I will, of course, focus on cryptology, but you can enlarge your view to any IT security mechanism. So, in fact, the key international text and regulation that you have to analyze is the Wassenaar Agreement. 42 countries have signed this international agreement, which is in fact dual-use technology and armament and ammunition control. It's very strange to include cryptography as ammunition and missiles, but well. I strongly advise you, for example, to go on this Dutch website, because you have the different, it is nearly updated frequently, about the export control, the import control, and the domestic use. And if you want to find information in Wassenaar agreement, you have to read the list 5b, and they say, you can read it, that exporting encryption algorithm with key size greater than 56 bits must be controlled, which is totally mad by nowadays, but it's still valid. So if we very naively try to compare the regulation and the reality, exporting encryption system or device and so on, enforcing encryption of larger key size should be a clear violation of this agreement, unless some sort of control can be input and enforced in a way or another. And once again, don't think to the encryption algorithm alone. There is all the environment, from the management to the implementation aspect, that are very important. So, when we mean to break a system, in fact, I was working in this area years ago. In fact, you cannot only consider academic approach. They are interesting because they are part of they contribute to define what that the standardization entities say: standard security and end-to-end security. The referential is academic contribution. But if you want to really break a system, you have a lot of constraints to fulfill. For example, time. You have supercomputing time, especially. Generally, you have a limited amount of data, not terabytes of encrypted data. And of course, you have to play it again and again and again, because the encrypted traffic is bound to explode. That's why you have to have a very broad view about the different sort of control. I have summarized, I have analyzed through years different cases, and especially the Snowden leaks. You have here the type of target you intend. Either this target is connected but without any protection, or is a bit much clever and use VPN or encryption, or to the extent they are not connected, you are here more in governmental world, for example, satellite communication and so on. So you have here the data you may access, and in fact, the more red, the more difficult, the more deep you have to go. The corresponding NSA programs, among many others, the different techniques, and you see we will here consider mathematical backdoors to deal with the most difficult case. And you have a recent example of attacks using those techniques. I will come back to the Hans Buller case further. But for example, here, the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Petrobras in Brazil, and so on. So there are a lot of examples proving that trying to input backdoors from the implementation level, management level, to the device level is not only possible, but has already been done. So I would just like to precise two terms. Generally, in the cryptography literature, you find the term trapdoor, while I will use the term backdoors. In cryptography, trapdoors generally are a very important property, especially in asymmetric cryptology. If you want to reverse the encryption or be able to verify a signature, you must reverse the mathematical process and hence have what we call the trapdoor. So it is a desirable, required property. On the contrary, backdoor is an undesirable feature. It means a secret which is present to the advantage of the attacker only. And the knowledge of that backdoor enables to break the system. Until now, the most known case refer to key management, for example, key escrowing or key distribution protocols and weaknesses. You can also work at the operating system levels. I'm always very surprised that for more than 20 years we still have recurring vulnerabilities that enable us to do a lot of things. They just are changing month after month. But if you consider implementation backdoor, sooner or later all the hackers will find them. So you have to go deeper if you want to hide and to be more efficient. So the key principle is to put a secret flow on the mathematical design of the encryption and let your algorithm be public, remains public. It's very important to gain public confidence. Of course, extracting the backdoor must be very difficult, not to say impossible, at least from a complexity theory point of view. And in the classification of possible backdoors, you have two main categories. The first one refers to natural weaknesses. In fact, the guy who has designed the algorithm did it naively or honestly, but he is not aware of some techniques that is known only by the intelligence domain. And the tester certifier for the two most recent encryption algorithms, DES and AES, we can suspect, or at least ask ourselves the question, it was a choice of the National Institute of Standard Technology, backed from a technical point of view by the NSA. So there was a debate, and the NSA acknowledged that in fact for the differential cryptanalysis, they knew this technique 20 years before BM and Shamir have published their work. So it's an interesting aspect. The other case, which is probably the worst, in fact, the designer intently put a mathematical backdoor. Generally, we can observe that generally they are working close to the governmental area in the defense industry. I will just mention two cases right after. It is an area where there are extremely few research and only very non-existent of NSA and GCHQ programs, but it is clear that other intelligence agencies, maybe in China or in Russia or in other countries, have the same kind of programs. So the question is, if I use an encryption algorithm, can I trust algorithm coming from a third-party country? And in fact, what is very surprising that since cryptography is supposed to be free, at least from the late 90s, in fact, we have some, and for me, security means variety. You can check, try to find a security product who has not the logo AES inside. So in fact, despite this freedom, we have only one single algorithm everywhere. Well, for me, I consider it rather disturbing. So the aim of our research, which is of course a long-standing research, is it possible to backdoor encryption algorithm? And we will focus mainly on block cipher because they are most present-day algorithm. But of course, we could do the same for stream ciphers. So it is a first approach, and I will present you an algorithm we exploit a very simple backdoor, despite the fact it is efficient, because it's the most interesting to explain very simply how it is possible to do that. And we will consider linear partitions of the plain text and ciphertext data. Of course, the partition will be part of the secret. So you will find all technical detail, all the cryptanalysis implementation on this free book. It was not possible to put it on the Black Hat website because the file was too big, but this is a book with any technical details, and you can check and download it for free. So, before presenting the algorithm, I would like to go to do a little bit history, very interesting history. In fact, since until the late 70s, cryptography was just consulted in the governmental industrial world. industry, of course, related to nation states. And more than 90% of the market in governmental crypto machine was held by two Swiss companies. Switzerland sells chocolate, cuckoos, and banks, but also they were the major actor on the crypto machine industry. In 1995, more than 120 countries and transnational organizations were using Swiss crypto machine. Except a very few countries, USA, France, UK, you can add maybe 2 or 3 more, but only 2 or 3 more. But in 1995, a very big case has occurred, and which has changed the face of the cryptographic world. So, Hans Bühler, I strongly advise you to read this book. Unfortunately, it is in German, but I'm currently trying to find time to translate it. It is a full story. In fact, he was the top representative from CryptoAG, and he had been arrested in Iran in 1992, because in fact, due to some leaks in the press around terrorist attacks by governmental officials, the Iran government were convinced very quickly that in fact their crypto machine booked to CryptoAG were rigged. And in fact, he spent 9 months in Iranian jail, and the scandal has been quickly revealed. NSA, BND, and others intelligence services had infiltrated those companies, but also other European companies selling crypto machines. It means, and I will show you some examples as a conclusion, that during nearly 50 years, all the diplomatic, military, governmental traffic of nearly 120 countries were fully read by Yakuza and ANSYS. So it is the alliance between Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK, and USA. So you have here a couple of partial translation. You have the name of the mathematician from the NSA who were involved. So I will let you on the slide. You see that you can find very famous names. For example, here, here. So you see you have a diplomatic example. For example, during the war between Ireland and UK, or during negotiation with Argentina, and so on. All the recent history has a cryptographic side linked to this case. So, and you find Nokia, Transvertex, and so on. So, read this book, it's very interesting, and you will discover the hidden face of cryptographic history for the last part of the 20th century. So here's a case I've analyzed very common techniques, more related to stream ciphers, where in fact you take a very critical primitive which generate our Boolean functions. They are supposed to be highly nonlinear, correlation, immune, and so on. So I have a base key, which is going to initialize the shift register, and you have a message key. And in this series of crypto machines, in fact, the message key was modifying the trust table of the Boolean function by half. In this way, dynamically, in fact, you introduce either you preserve correlation that can be exploited for cryptanalysis and for short ciphertext cryptanalysis, or you create some correlation that also can be exploited. So it's a very common technique. Of course, there are a lot of other techniques, but well, many cryptographic machines were using this technique. So more recently, closer to us, the Burrell program. I will let you read, but in fact, it was a $250 million in order to interfere on a standardization process, to modify, to temper national standards, and so on. Or to prevent, for example, strong algorithm to be chosen by ISO more recently. So in fact, this big plan, it has been revealed by Snowden. So you have here one news mentioning this case. If we consider the history, the particular history of the random number generator, which was a product for RSA, for example, it was ISO and ANSI standard. It was used in many environments, sensitive environments, to generate random keys. And for example, in SSL TLS protocol. But if you consider some constant P and Q, because there are elliptic curve crypto system, and in fact, they are the most part of the backdoor. At the beginning, no one was able to say where this parameter come from. But in fact, in the specification from the US federal document, they say if you use these two particular constants, you will be certified and your product will be a standard. It was a mandatory condition. So we speak about the NIST, National Institute of Standard and Technology, and the federal process standardization. So in fact, what's the effect? Normally, if your system is strong, you can revert the part with a green arrow, but you cannot revert this part, so you cannot break the system. When using this particular value of P and Q, it is possible to revert even the red arrow part. And of course, to break and to predict the number generation. So you have the timeline. I won't go through exhaustively, but what is interesting, there are a few comments worked in 2006, 2006, 2007 that suggest that there was probably an issue, a concern, and probably a backdoor coming from the NSA. Despite this, in fact, the National Institute Standard, SP 800, has certified and included this random generator in the standard. But in 2013, Snowden made his famous leaks, and he revealed that, in fact, there was a security agreement, $10 million, in order to tamper this standard and introduce that infamous constant P and Q. So finally, NIST was forced to say we have to remove this random generator from the standard. What was interesting, that if you apply all the usual and official tools to validate, at least from a statistical point of view, I mean, for example, the FIPS 140, which is a standard for statistical evaluation, the tests were successful. The random generator was considered good for the service, good to be used, secure enough. So it means that if you make a statistical evaluation with public and official tools, it is of course a mandatory, necessary condition, but it is not a necessary condition. And all the trick will be to pass all the tests while introducing some weakness that it is not covered by the test. It is what we call statistical or security simulability. And in many G8 countries, in fact, the statistical testing of cryptographic product is based on secret testing. They are not all public. Of course, they include most of the famous statistical tests, but there are additional tests which are not public. Very recently, the NSA released two encryption algorithms, block cipher, that are in the class of the lightweight block cipher intended for the IoT world. And of course, the NSA made a lot of efforts to make these two algorithms be standardized by ISO. But a lot of pressure from experts, both from ISO and the cryptographic community, the pressure was strong in us, and last September, ISO finally rejected the two NSA encryption algorithms. We are in a world where not everything is public. We can suspect that there was some evidences that has conducted ISO to take this decision. So, example in the news very recently in last September. So I would like now to explain to you how one example of how to introduce a backdoor into a block cipher. Once again, it will be possible to do the same, different way, with different techniques in true cipher as well. So, in fact, the general principle, from a theoretical point of view, a formal point of view, in fact, you first design an algorithm with a backdoor. In our case, there are secret backdoors, which are not public. Then we choose a one-way transformation. One-way means that, in fact, you can easily compute from one direction, but it is difficult, at least computationally, to reverse it. So you can transform what we call design transformation. You can transform your original design with backdoor into a new design, public design, without the backdoor. And of course, if the designer knows some information, he will be able to reverse the process and exploit the backdoor. In BA, in fact, we have the duality between what we know about the secret SBoxes and the modified SBoxes, which are public. So it is the general principle, whatever may be the class of encryption algorithm you consider. Design transformation. Never publish your algorithm in the way you have designed it at the beginning. So, in fact, it is a theoretical work done last year, and it was a generalization on Kenny Patterson's work on Royal Holloway College. And our algorithm, which stands for backdoor encryption algorithm, is directly inspired from the AES. It was our intent. If we want to be credible, we have to be close to what is currently used. So, I will try to do as less mathematics as possible, but well, in fact, we are going to consider a secret partition of the plain text space and the corresponding ciphertext space. Partition means I have here considered all the 3 bits pattern, just a toy example to make things clear, and in fact, I will split this set into small subsets that share no element. So here, we have 4 subsets which constitutes the partition. Of course, it's a toy example. In our case, we consider SBoxes of 10 bits, 10-bit patterns, and we consider 4 different SBoxes. It means, so you have all the possible linear partitions over 3 bits, very easy, if one of it is a secret, but in our case, this is the number per SBox of possible partitions. And if you consider the 4 SBoxes we use, you have to take this number to the power 4. It means that you have a lot of time and computing resource in order to find a backdoor. It has exponential complexity to find it at random. So the general principle is the following. You split with a hidden secret partition of A, which is a plain text space, and you want to map it to another partition B of the ciphertext. And the algorithm is designed in such a way that it will preserve, at least statistically, this partition. We consider linear partition because they are the most easiest to consider at the beginning, and especially the most simple to illustrate. Otherwise, it would require more mathematics. So, and of course, we must involve at least one SBox. So, as for the parameters, we work on 80-bit data blocks. The secret key, the master key is 120 bits and 11 rounds. So if you compare to existing algorithm, they are quite at the same parameter, at least for the key and the number of rounds. You have here the primitive base function, so I won't detail this that much, and you will find everything, all the technical details in the free book. What is interesting? Of course, we have analyzed our algorithm as any certifying authorities would do. We perform statistical tests with the FIPS 140 recommendation, the US NIST standard, and we have applied all the different evaluation with respect to linear and differential cryptanalysis. And BA1 is compliant. Of course, it is not. You cannot use it for security purposes. But it is interesting, always use the evaluation tool from the adversary in order to be sure that he will accept your algorithm. So, very quickly, you have the round function. So you have a key whitening part, you have the Xboxes, you have diffusion layer, so everything is very classical. You have the key schedule, so I won't go into detail too much. Now let us see how to exploit that. The principle that when you know the secret starting partition, A1, B1, C1, D1, and repeated twice. In fact, the key whitening part does not change the partition. The substitution layer will, but it will map to another partition. And the diffusion layer will come back to the original input partition for the round air at the output, and so you repeat. Of course, the nature, the knowledge of A1, B1, C1, D1 is secret, and this process can be ensured because the SBoxes have backdoors. So, how to break that? In fact, we exploit the fact that we have a partition here. We have a very toy example of 4 partitions, and we have consolidated one coset. Coset means subset in our case. And in fact, when you go through the function, the consultation, you change the number of subset, but you don't change the consultation, the respective consultation in the different subset. And of course, the secret, it is how you have to split the plain text and ciphertext space in order to exploit this. Then, if you, on this part, if you reverse the process and you make an assumption for the last round key, you start from a given partition that you are aware of, then you will go to the process, and if you have the right key, in fact, the consultation will not change significantly, just the number, the nature of the coset will change. But you will go through 3 less populated coset and 1 with a strong population, and you will find the same. On the contrary, so it is for 1 round. And if you make a wrong assumption about the key, in fact, you will observe a dilution, and round after round, you will have something which is close to uniformity. So, now let us explain how to recover the secret key from the secret knowledge. Of course, we are going to do a classical attack, which is a last round attack. I mean, we are going to first try to recover the 80 bit of the last round key. It is impossible to do an exhaustive search, but we are going to first work chunk by chunk, and we work first for the 2 SBoxes S3 here, which are the most modified. I will explain right after. And so it is 2 to the power 20 exhaustive search, exploiting this repartition of population in the different subsets. And we keep only 2 to the power 15 candidates. Then we add 1 SBox, and regularly we test the possible candidates, we keep always 2 to the 15 keys, and so on, adding SBoxes 1 by 1 in order to divide and conquer and go through the cryptanalysis without too much computational effort. At the end, we have 2 to the power 15 candidates of 80 bit. We are going now to use a key schedule feature, which is fully public. In general, this feature do exist in other encryption systems, but it will enable us to select the best key among the possible candidates. And then we test using the next step and this relationship. We test and keep the best key. So now we have the 80, the good candidate for the 80 bit key. We need to recover 40 additional bits. We will do the same. We will observe some properties with respect to diffusion layer and the key schedule, and then we will do the same, chunk by chunk, each chunk being represented by a SBox. And finally, we keep a number of candidates, and in this time, to validate the candidate, we just have to do an encryption, because we know the ciphertext and the corresponding plain text. And that's all. Of course, if you use the secret SBoxes, the analysis of the SBoxes will reveal some combinatorial structure. That's the reason why we do not publish the secret SBox. Of course, in the book there are, in order to understand the process of design transformation. But in fact, in the real case, only the public SBoxes would be published. They are modified, slightly modified, with the corresponding probability, in order to get rid of the combinatorial structure that could reveal some tricks about the trapdoor. And once again, these SBoxes are fully compliant to be resistant to linear and differential cryptanalysis. So, in fact, this probability made that, in fact, the public SBox and the secret SBox behave in the same way with a probability 0.5, and over all the round functions with a probability to the power minus 11. That's the reason why, in fact, we need only 30,000 plain text, and the final complexity, you mean only 600 kilobytes of data in order to break the system. It requires approximately 10 seconds on a good recent laptop. But of course, only if you know the secret partition that can be used. The probability of success is more than 95%. We do a lot of experiment and to get this probability. If it would fail, in fact, you will take more candidates. It will be a bit more complex, but the approach remains the same. So I'm sorry, I will not do a demo because, in fact, my laptop was not as a VGA plug, but you will find everything in the book. There are all the algorithms you can implement yourself, and you will see you should obtain something around 10 seconds. So, to conclude, in fact, with the example, it is not only one we are working on, but this example shows that you can you can design an encryption block cipher with a backdoor, and while it seems to be resistant to the non-public evaluation tools. Of course, do not use it for actual security. It is not dedicated for real security. So in the future, we are still working on this research area, both in block cipher and stream cipher. We would like to consider more complex combinatorial structure. For example, considering linear partition over the data spaces is interesting, but well, I think we could do better. For example, using nonlinear structure like combinatorial designs and so on to hide the backdoor far deeper. In the cryptanalysis I have presented, in fact, we make no assumption about the key. So the cryptanalysis work, whatever may be the key you choose. It would be interesting to also make the cryptanalysis key dependent and to have some sort of partitioning about the key space. it will be even more difficult to extract the backdoor. So in the forthcoming months, we should publish new backdoor algorithm in order to make this research progress, and we hope that people will be interested to do research in this area because we need it. That's all. I hope that my English was clear, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Hello, my name is Jaroslav, and it was a pleasure listening to your presentation. I wonder if you have tried analyzing some existing ciphers and if you have detected any of this kind of trickery in them. I mean, I saw in your paper that you looked at AES, but recently NSA is trying to get standardized two ciphers, Simon and Spec. So did you, for example, try looking at them if there's any of similar weird structure going on?
Of course, we tried, and it is partly a current way, especially for Spec and Simon. It is always difficult to predict whether we will have a result or not. We expect. I think that Simon and Spec seems to be good candidate. So, to be continued, I would say, as for the AES, well, in fact, when I have published result in 2003, in fact, people have misunderstood what we said. We just found that there was 2 bits of information about the key that seems to be biased. We never pretend that it was usable to break this system. But no one can prove that there is a backdoor, but no one can prove the contrary. It is precisely what is disturbing for me. When you deal with security, especially citizen security, industry security, you cannot take as a proof of security the absence of proof of insecurity, which is precisely what is at stake presently. Because we are in an area where people who are working in this area do not publish everything. So that's why this presentation, just to open your mind and help you to ask the good question. I think that we should have a lot of different encryption algorithms, not only one. But as for the AES, we still work on this algorithm. So once again, to be continued. So once again, if you have my email address and you have all the technical details about the algorithm and the cryptanalysis technique. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I enjoyed it. I'm Faisal from Belgium. I was wondering, do you have any insight on methods to detect this kind of tampering?
This technique here?
Yes.
Well, we are working, of course, working on that, and I have different ideas. I have to test it, to implement it, in order to see whether, from a computational point of view, it would be possible. Of course, for me, it's very important to find a way to detect this. Because we would only solve only one part of a problem. Of course, we have designed the backdoors in such a way it should be difficult to extract it. But science history always showed that some more clever people can find something that we think impossible to find. And part of this research is also to open this reflection around mathematical backdoor and to incite other people maybe to find something we have been unable to see or to find. But we are working on the detection part. I expect to have new results and to evaluate the overall complexity. But of course, we work, and we can talk about right after if you are interested.
Hello. Thanks for the talk. I'm wondering if using two backdoors algorithm at the same time in any way, like chaining them or in different chains, would mitigate any of the vulnerabilities in any of them?
Yes, I think it's a key question, and thank you for this question. I think that if you want to apply the cautiousness principle, chaining two different algorithms would be a good option, at least at the beginning, provided they are coming from two different countries, backed by two different agencies. Well, of course, in this present case, if you chain our algorithm with another encryption algorithm, and the order may be important, well, you will of course destroy the effect of the backdoor, because in fact you will destroy the linear partition. But it is also possible to chain two algorithms, and the backdoor is partly split into the two algorithms. So, but of course, without any more information, I think that chaining two different algorithms would be a good idea.
So I'm just going to bring up this in terms of the keynote, and we're talking about international cooperation and getting countries to work together. Essentially, we're a big world community these days. So why focus on foreign versus domestic encryption algorithms? With this advice, doesn't it minimize the relevance of international encryption certifications? And how do you feel the international community should move forward in terms of trusting which encryption algorithms? Well, difficult question. I have many ideas, but I'm not sure they are politically correct. In fact, you must first understand that the choice by the industry is driven by the standardization at the national level. You never have to forget that the industry choose algorithms that are allowed by the national government. So the problem is not the industry. They need money. The money comes from the government. So I think that the problem is, I think that cryptography and freedom, which is what we want to protect at the very final end, is too important to let government define what must be cryptography. I hope that there will be more and more independent bodies like EFF, like there is in Switzerland. Sorry, I have mistaken I've forgotten the name, but I think we need to have independent, freedom-driven entities, mostly with hackers, with scientific, in order to take the control over the cryptographic definition, cryptographic contribution. Recently, September this year, when Simon and Spec has been rejected by ISO, it is because hackers and cryptographers made a lot of pressure on this standardization entity. So I think that the role of the hackers community, the scientific community, the independent community, the freedom community has to be more and more important. We cannot let the government be the only player and the only decision. Honestly, I do not trust international cooperation, if any, except to enforce this control in a wider way. I don't trust political entities that much, at least in security.
Hi. Different encryption algorithms have different complexity. So, for example, the NIST elliptic curve parameters contain a lot of information that could potentially contain backdoors, and that's why people are so skeptical. Do you think that could be a drive for less complex algorithms that would be more difficult to insert backdoors into?
From my experience, it is clear that as soon as an algorithm seems to be too complex, there is something to hide. So simplicity in the design, if it is your question, is of course a very key property. But that's not all, because finally our algorithm is very simple. Encryptography is rather simple in the design.
So it is not that much complicated. So, of course, the design has to be simple to be understood by the vast majority of cryptographers, but it is, once again, a necessary condition. I don't think it is a sufficient condition. So, thank you very much for your attention.